Today's gospel text is one of the sort of classic social justice texts. I think it's probably right up there with Micah 6:8, which is, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. If you go to a protest, there's a good chance you'll see somebody holding a poster with Matthew 25 or some synopsis of this text on it. And it is a good call to our work as Christians working towards a more just society. That we should do these things because this is where we encounter Christ. This is a totally reasonable thing to think about this text. However, in the story, the king is praising those who have done these things without realizing what it is that they're doing. The sheep people, or we could reclaim the pejorative sheeple, they did not set out to encounter God through service to their neighbors. They simply found themselves moved to love or compassion or relationship with the hungry and the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned. And they acted without any kind of apparent awareness for the full impact of what they were doing. They just acted out of that deep drive of love for one another. Which gets me wondering when we may have had such an experience. Or if we have had such an experience. Doing something for someone else or being the recipient of such generosity and care. Not doing these things or having them done to us with the intention of serving God or seeing Christ, but just doing it because that's just the thing to do. It made me think of a moment that I had recently with our youngest at a lunch that was a work lunch. There were other clergy folk and other people there, and I was, supposed to be the pastor, but I was also the parent because, childcare doesn't always work the way you want it to. And so our toddler came with me to this lunch. And it was running late, and he was getting a little bit tired because it was running into nap time. Frankly, I was getting a little tired too. But I know how to sit still. And he doesn't. And he was getting richy, and he was climbing out of the high chair because those straps in restaurant high chairs just never work right. And I was, a little stressed out about all this. And the person sitting across the table from our son, one of the more important members of this group of people at the lunch, just picked up a salt shaker and started playing with it and making it talk to him and just entertaining him. And even now, as I talk about it, and later when I went to talk to her about it and thank her for it, I got choked up. Because it was such a powerful moment of doing something that you just do. I mean, if I were sitting across from somebody else's little munchkin who was getting richy, I would just pick up the salt shaker or whatever, and it's just something that you just do because you do it. She wasn't trying to find Christ in the suffering of a mother with a child who was not behaving at lunch. She wasn't trying to be a better Christian by playing with my son. She was just doing the thing that you do in that situation without perhaps realizing just how deeply it touched me. And this is hard to think of in our lives, I think. These moments are hard to come by. Because we live in a world that teaches us to always look for the advantage, to consider the benefit to ourselves from our actions, even from our works of charity. And you should remember, as the year ends, that your contributions to the congregation are tax deductible. This is the self-benefit, right? This is what the world teaches us. I mean, you hear it in every context of giving. Give to NPR, it's tax deductible. Never mind the fact that, like, if you like it, it's a good organization, you should just support them so that they continue to exist. You know? But we are taught and conditioned to always look for the advantage, for how it helps us out. And if we go forward from this lesson thinking, well, we need to help the hungry and thirsty and the sick and the naked and certainly the naked, it's getting cold outside, but you know, and the imprisoned and the strangers, we need to help these people because it'll be good for us. God will like us better if we do this. And we'll find Jesus there, which is good for us, because I have some things I'd like to ask him. But if we go about this work looking for our own advantage, then we're just doing what the world has taught us to do. I mean, it will still help people, for sure. It's still worth doing for those who receive it, for sure. But what Jesus is praising in this particular passage is people who are acting counter to that culture of looking for self-advantage. I mean, I'm certain that if the goats were given a second chance, now that he's told them the deal, they would probably be very helpful to people, right? And if the sheep, if this wasn't, you know, at the end of things and the sheep had to go back out into the world and continue their lives, I don't know if they would be able to do it anymore the way they had done it before. The sort of unconscious giving and loving of each other without a thought to, oh, I might see Jesus there. Oh, this might look good on my report card before God. It isn't easy to walk the Jesus way in our world. Because even as we try, even as we do the things that God calls us to do to care for each other, that little voice, not the God, Holy Spirit calling voice, but that other little voice whispers in our ears, this could be good for you. You know, in high school, like, oh, you should do this thing, it'll look good on your college application, right? Or, oh, if you give to these organizations, you know, and you'll be more popular in your community and have more power there. That little voice is always calling us. It just isn't that easy to follow Jesus in our world. Now, as I had mentioned at the beginning of worship, this is our last Sunday in the Gospel of Matthew. We won't really hear from Matthew for another 3 years. Our lectionary is in a cycle of 3 years. We get a year of Matthew, a year of Mark, and some John, and a year of Luke. And so this cycle of 3 years has been in place for many, many years. And so every 3 years we hear basically the same readings, and we follow the same patterns. Now, this year of Matthew, which began last December with the beginning of Advent and ends today, happened to coincide with a rather acrimonious year from, say, last November, whatever the date was, I can't remember the date, the election day, almost paralleled perfectly with our year of Matthew. It's been a rather difficult year to be anybody, and to believe anything, and to have any sort of affiliation with anything. Because we as a society have become, I don't think we've actually become more polarized, but I think we've become more aware of it. And it's become more opened up. And we talk about it more. And some people have become more comfortable really digging into whatever their position is and refusing to see any sort of way forward except their own. So this year of Matthew has coincided with this, with a continuing exposure of these wounds that our society has. Our country is suffering, and has always been. These are not new problems of patriarchy and racism and homophobia and Islamophobia and xenophobia and greed and all the rest. But this year it seems like the bandage has been ripped off a little bit more than we're used to. And as this has gone hand in hand throughout these past 12 months with our walking through Matthew, the bishop shared with us at an event the other day that she had actually received a call from an angry parishioner from some congregation. Maybe it was one of you. I don't think so, though. You're pretty upfront with me. But complaining that the pastor had chosen the text against President Trump or some of his policies that he put forward. And she explained this is a 3-year cycle of readings that was put in place several years ago. But Matthew has walked with us so well this year, not necessarily against any particular political party or policy or person, but reminding us in all of these things that there is a different way to walk than the way of the world. Jesus, in Matthew, has continually reminded us that regardless of our political party, regardless of our country of birth, or any other human-defined way of categorizing and separating ourselves from one another, it is God who creates us, and God who names us. We find ourselves often overwhelmed and stuck in the mire these days of the kingdoms of our own creation. Palace intrigue and partisan politics, vying for power, and considering the ways in which we each and our larger organizations that we affiliate with can gain the most advantage. Now, I'm sure this past Thursday, there were some interesting conversations around your tables at Thanksgiving, or perhaps some very loud silence, because of the way our world and our human-created structures have so effectively divided us from each other. And we've bought into the lie that we are Americans first, or Republicans first, or Democrats first, or white, or black, or Latino first, or native English speakers first, or whatever other human category first. That is who we are, and we have to identify ourselves that way and relate to others based on those markers. But this is not the case. In this place, and in the reading and the proclamation of our story of God, we are reminded that above and before all, we are children of God. First. It doesn't matter what party is on your voter registration. It doesn't matter what button you pushed or lever you pulled or box you checked. It doesn't matter how you think the best way to deal with poverty or hunger or civil unrest or any of those things. It doesn't matter what labels get put on any of that. All of those things divide us and separate us from each other if we start there. What matters is not the titles we've given ourselves, but the title that God has given us. We heard in our first reading and in the psalm that we are God's sheep. We are God's sheep. Now, there is no worldly advantage to that title. It doesn't really get you anywhere in life. It's not going to get you a raise, or a nice apartment, or a better car. But it's who we are at the core of it all. And so whatever politics or social ideas or any doctrines outside of that we subscribe to, it all has to grow out of that understanding that before any of that, before any of these systems existed, there was God who creates us, and God who names us as children of God and followers of Christ. So this year of Matthew, I hope, has reminded us of that. Jesus in Matthew is pretty clear on who we are. But I don't want to focus this reading on the actions of the sheep or the goats, because, like I said, they didn't know what they were doing or not doing. They didn't do it with the intention of finding God there. But today is not called We the Sheep Sunday. It's called Christ the King Sunday. So what kind of a king do we have in this passage? What kind of a leader? Christ is not found in the places of power. In a few weeks, we will hear about God becoming incarnate, becoming human. And God does not become incarnate in Caesar or Herod. God is incarnate in a helpless infant from a no-name town. The king in our gospel reading today is hungry and thirsty, is a stranger, someone we don't know, that wanders up in need. God, this king, is sick. That's ridiculous. He's God. Why would he be sick? And in prison. this image of a king who makes the laws, right, is in prison. This is the King we serve. This is the God we worship. Today, on Christ the King, in a couple weeks on Christmas, in the spring, on Easter, we are constantly reminded that the King we serve is not one of being loud and braggadocious and using his power to hurt people or to compel people or to get his own way. The King we serve is found in the lowly, in the weak, in the helpless.